Hello and welcome to this presentation about migrating a Springboot application into Quarkus. Thank you for coming and being here. I hope you will find this presentation interesting. Why I gave to this presentation as a title saying challenge accepted? Because for me it was a big challenge from not knowing anything from Quarkus, starting coding, and see finally if it was worth it. Wait until the end and you will see if that's the case or not. So let's start with the presentation. I'm going to show these different elements of the presentation. First, I will introduce myself. Then I will tell you what can you expect of this presentation. It's important to put expectations into the right limits. Then, for those of you that do not know what is Quarkus at the moment, I will show you a brief demonstration about what it is and what can you do with it. Then I will show why I decided to migrate and if you should think about migrating or not. Obviously, then I will show the different steps that I followed in order to do this migration. Finally, I will show a performance comparative between Springboot and the different two choices that we can choose from Quarkus in order to see if really we have improved a bit or not. And in the end, I always want to finish my presentations giving references. So a list of materials that you can consume in order to move forward, to know more about this technology, to learn, and also to try and test the technology that it is the best way to make a decision about something. Those materials helped me when I did this migration. I hope they will help you too. So this is who I am. I'm Jonathan Vila. I come from Barcelona, Spain, and I was nominated as Java champion last year. I am one of the leaders of the Barcelona Java user group and also one of the co-founders of the JVC Conf, a conference that we host here in Barcelona every year. And I work as a software engineer at Red Hat in the application modernization and migration team. You can find on the left my Twitter handle, my email, my blog post, or my GitHub account if you want to contact me to check the code of this migration or others, or just simply check the different articles that I publish in my blog. You can find one article about this migration, but also about other topics, test containers, and also testing Camel and other topics too. So what can you expect from this presentation? Well, in the end, this is only my opinion. This is only my experience doing this migration, but I hope that everyone will find a different solution for the same migration. You are not going to receive a magistral lecture about anything. I'm just showing my experience. Then you can take your learnings from that as you wish. This is also something that worked, so it was not the intention of this migration to do the best migration possible. It was about doing the fastest migration possible. So without investing a lot of effort, what can we get from this migration to Quarkus? And as I said, this is not the way. You can find several ways of doing this migration. This migration has been done using an application from Springboot, Springboot Pet Clinic REST, and using Springboot version 2.4.2, and using migrating to Quarkus version 1.13. So let's start explaining what it is Quarkus, for those of you that do not know what it is. This presentation is also full of screenshots from old retro games. Well, they made me fly back on time when I was a teenager. So, well, if you are around my age, you will find these games also very, familiar. So, what is Quarkus? Quarkus is basically a Kubernetes native, so that means something that can talk to Kubernetes very easily. Also, that its main goal is to be fast and with low memory footprint. You can find or you can use Quarkus from Java, Scala, or Kotlin. And the main goal too is that Quarkus is tailored to be always compatible with GraalVM. So you can run your applications made by Quarkus on the JVM as a regular Java application, or also you can compile them using Graal into a native application. We will see which are the differences between them, but basically for one JVM application you need the JVM. For a native application you don't need to install anything, so you are simply having one file that you deliver and it will be run as a regular native application in Linux or other systems. And also, one of the important facts on Quarkus is that they are not reinventing the wheel. So they are using standard libraries that we've been using from quite a long time. You will still be using this code, but Quarkus will do its magic on build time. So on coding time, you are not be using a lot of Quarkus. You are going to be using those libraries, and Quarkus will do the process on build time in order to have a fast and low memory footprint application. So those Quarkus key facts, well, it's, as I said, produces an application that it is way faster than the regular applications, and also with very low memory footprint compared to the regular applications. It's also focused on easy to code, so not adding extra complexities into the language. So you are going to be using the same code, the same libraries, and nothing more. Also, it's open source, and they have fast-paced releases, so you can find several releases every month. So 1, 2, or 3 releases every month with lots of, obviously, bugs fixed, with new features, and with new extensions every now and then. What are those extensions? Extensions are those libraries that I mentioned before. And Quarkus has lots of those extensions. So it's a way to connect Quarkus with Kafka or Camel or Keycloak, Spring, REST-easy, Microprofile, up to 150 extensions. So those open source technologies that are in the market, Quarkus most probably is going to have an extension for that library. That extension will allow you to use that library and also still be producing optimized code that can run on a native compilation. about the fast-paced releases. As I said, they release super often, and well, to have a big picture of which has been the evolution of Quarkus, well, it started on late 2018, so 2 years and a half more or less, and we are now on version 1.13, and there have been a lot of versions in the middle. So you can see that, well, there's a lot of movement and a very dynamic technology. Related to the Quarkus performance, so as I said, one of the main goals is to produce something that it is faster and lighter. So if we compare the Quarkus with the traditional cloud native stack, well, Quarkus produces a code that will be half the memory footprint, and it's going to be also way faster. So if you compare on the blue line, the blue bar with the gray bar, we are moving from more than 4 seconds to around 1 second. This is in JVM. We are still in JVM. But if we go to native, that it is as easy as adding -p native. And this way, Quarkus will produce a native artifact. You don't need to touch your code, add new extensions, add new libraries. No, just simply specify this profile on your command line and it will produce a native image. So if we compare the traditional cloud native stack with Quarkus native, we are going to 136 to 12, so it's 1/10 of memory. But if we compare speed, well, in order to do the first response, the traditional stack is taking more than 4 seconds and the other one is taking only 16 milliseconds. So that's a huge difference, and that involves only on you adding -p native on your command line. Regarding the team behind Quarkus, well, there's a lot of people contributing to it, more than 400, and yeah, you can see here, just taking only 1 week, you can see 73 issues closed, new 53 new issues, 100 merge pull requests. Well, there's a lot of work behind, so you can see that it's a very active project. So let's talk about migration. So now you know who is talking to you. Also, you know what can you expect of this presentation. And at this moment, you also have a brief knowledge about what is Quarkus. So now let's focus on migration, as we are here in order to see a migration from Springboot to Quarkus. This particular picture is very, let's say, emotional for me, just because I never passed the stage 1 in Ghosts and Goblins, and well, I wanted to put this stage 2 here, although I invested a lot of money in arcades. Well, those times. So about why I decided to migrate. Okay, let's start first. What was my experience with the Springboot? Well, I used the Springboot in past projects, and it's been also always easy to develop. So you can use CDI, REST, you name it, and then it's very easy. Just you use annotations, it is auto-configured, auto-discovered. Well, it's very easy. But on the contrary, it takes a lot to start, And the tests are taking also a lot to start. So that was something that I didn't like of Springboot. Also, it's very heavyweight, so it's consuming a lot of memory. Nowadays, I can understand that there's no such problem on consuming memory if you are running on your laptop. But if you are running on clouds, then memory starts to be a crucial thing. And also, there are too many things that are happening under the hood. So as it has auto discovery, there are several libraries, tools that are running that I'm not even aware that they are running. So I didn't like this lack of control, let's say. And I heard about Quarkus, that it was saying, okay, it's easy to develop applications. So, okay, I'm not going to invest a lot of time learning this new technology. It's fast and lightweight. Okay, that's important for me. And also it's GraalVM compatible. Wow, that sounds interesting. Because one of the things that has been, let's say, an issue for Java, it's that if you want to go to a serverless world, with regular Java, it's hard because it takes a lot to start, that cold boot up. So if you are going to start your application several times, or you are going to start scale up and scale down your applications on Kubernetes, well, you are interested on being fast. So that seems very, very interesting, that we can move to serverless in order to save money, because now we don't need to have a machine 24 hours 7 days a week running. We can just simply have a function, so we are going to pay by the processing time, not for the resting time. So that's very interesting. So I decided to start the migration and see by myself if the numbers that are promised are really what I get. So I selected this Springboot Pet Clinic REST application because, as you can see, it has technologies that are included in most of the applications. So Spring Data, so to connect to database, web for the REST, security, documentation, well, Swagger, actuators to have different metrics, Micrometer to register all those metrics, CDI for the beans. It also has AOP, okay, in some cases it's used, and also it has catch. Okay, it seemed to me like a common application. In Quarkus, what we have is Hibernate Panache. Well, you can see here the correspondence between one technology on Springboot to Quarkus. So for data, Hibernate Panache; for REST, JAX-RS; Quarkus Security for security; OpenAPI for the Swagger documentation; SmallRye Health for the actuators; Microprofile Metrics or Micrometer for Micrometer; CDI spec for the CDI. There is no AOP on Quarkus. And Quarkus Catch for Spring Catch. So we have more or less what we need. Okay, so which are the migration steps to see, well, what's the work that we need to invest into this migration? For CDI, well, it's a matter of simply replacing the auto-wired by the inject annotation. You can use also the inject, the standard one, in your Springboot applications. But in case you don't, you simply just change the annotation. And now the beans are declared using application scoped for your regular beans. It has also auto injection on constructors and also is lazy by default, that it is very helpful if we want to improve in speed. Regarding the benefits or the drawbacks, well, it was very easy. I didn't find, or I didn't miss anything. Also, Quarkus has a way to inject beans based on the profile specified on the command line or even on a property in the properties file. So it's very useful. And well, we cannot have private members on injection, so to inject one member, it has to be at least package. JPA repositories, well, we are going to use Panache repository, and this will give us the common methods to handle repositories and entities. In this case, I moved to Panache repository base just to specify a different type for the identity members, just because as by default Panache relies on a long for the ID, but in the Spring one it was using an integer. So in order to not modify everything, I simply specified an integer in the repository, and that's it. The only drawback is that we don't have query DSL methods, so those methods that you create find by name and age greater than 30. Those methods, we don't have them on Quarkus, but you can annotate methods passing the query, and I think probably it's a clearer way to do this than with query DSL methods. That for simple methods probably it's a good idea, but it can become complicated when you start complicating the method to get the information. Regarding REST, well, it's a matter of moving to JAX-RS. In this case is again replacing annotations with exception of request mapping. In Spring we can have request mapping that includes the three elements, so the path, the verb, and the params. And in this case, with JAX-RS, we need to break it down into individual annotations. But it's very easy. It's a string replace, more or less. Regarding Spring security, well, it's again replacing one annotation by another. Instead of pre-authorized, we are going to use roles allowed, as you can see here on the left and on the right. It's very easy, and the only problem is that, well, on a Spring we can have expressions for the pre-authorized, as you can see here, but in Quarkus we need to simply pass the list of the roles. But in this case, in this migration, it was not a problem. Also, the security in this project was persisted into a database, and for that we are going to use Elytron Security JDBC for Quarkus, and specifying the behavior on the properties file. As you can see here, the query to obtain the password and the role from a user. With these properties, we configure the behavior, and it's very easy. The only thing, as I said before, Quarkus doesn't have an expression language for the roles. Regarding cross origin, well, it's very easy. Simply add these two properties in the properties file, and that's it. Simply, the only problem is that I didn't find a way to do this, to configure cores at the controller level. With Quarkus, apparently it was at global level, but in this particular project that was not a problem. With metrics, well, if you add a small right metrics extension, you are going to have all the system metrics by default. If you want to have custom metrics, then you need to use microprofile, as you can see here, with the counted and timed annotations. The other thing is that Spring is using micrometer that has a different notation on the metrics, but if you use this property that I put below, then Quarkus will make this compatibility of on the notation to happen, and then you will get more or less the same. Also, you can choose to use micrometer extension, and then even if you have custom metrics on the Springboot, you don't need to touch them. That's another approach. And in this case, we don't have AOP, and in that project, AOP was used to get the metrics for all the access to the database. So we will need to have to get this in a different approach. Let's see in a moment. With the validation, well, we are coming from Spring validation to Hibernate validator and moving from a controller at dice to an exception mapper. It's very similar. As you can see, the code is very, very similar, just simply changing the annotations, and that's it. Regarding OpenAPI, well, if you add OpenAPI extension, then you will have the Swagger documentation, the OpenAPI version 3 for all your project. And if you add a class extending application and you include this annotation, OpenAPI definition, then you can specify the header of the global information for your API. It's a straightforward migration, very easy. And also it has Swagger UI out of the box too. You can also enable it on production if you want. But the thing is that I didn't find a way to make Quarkus to produce the Swagger documentation or the OpenAPI based on a list of paths. So it is making the documentation based on all the controllers that it finds, the resources. But in Spring, you can specify which paths you want to include in order to hide some endpoints. As I said, AOP was used to get the metrics. So with this small method that you have on the left, you are reaching a lot of methods from the repositories that are in the application, and just simply using a stopwatch, getting the time of processing. We should do the same using or custom metrics annotating every method, or interceptors on the CDI, or even there's an easier way, that it is to include this property in the properties file. Quarkus Hibernate -ORM metrics enabled true, and then you will have all the metrics that were collected with AOP on the Spring project into the metrics on the system. Even you will get more metrics, not only those that were collected by the AOP, just only focusing on the methods, but here you can have, well, metrics globally at Hibernate level. That also can be interesting. Regarding local caching, well, the approach is very, very similar. Quarkus uses a library called Caffeine to have the feature of local cache feature. In this case, it's the matter of adding this cache result annotation, giving a name to this cache, and then specifying the cache on the properties file to set the initial capacity and the maximum size for each cache. Very easy. Regarding testing, here is where you need to put more effort on changing things. So in this case, it's a matter of moving from mock-MVC to rest assured. The annotation of rest assured for me, it's a bit more clear, but it's depend on everyone. And also the I needed to change the expressions to check the values on the JSON on the return JSON from JSON path to GPath, but it's very similar. Regarding test, well, if you want to have an in-memory database to do your tests, then it's a matter of adding Quarkus test resource and specifying the test resource class, in this case H2 database test resource, and every time that your test starts, Quarkus will execute the lifecycle of this H2 database test resource, and it will start an in-memory database. So very easy. Regarding mocking, well, it's a matter of adding Quarkus JUnit 5 Mockito, and with the annotation inject mock, then you will have your beans mocked in and injected in your tests. So we've reached a point where I tell you, forget everything. If you want to migrate a Spring application into Quarkus, there's even an easier way. If you want to be in the Spring world, so using the Spring code, but producing super fast applications. Those are the Quarkus Spring extensions. So if you are using Spring Web, then you use a Spring Web extension from Quarkus, and then you don't have to touch your code, and Quarkus will do its magic on build phase and will produce the fast application. But you don't have to touch your code because it is based on the interfaces that you were using. So don't touch your code and Quarkus will produce the fast application. The same with the Spring dependency injection. This will make that you don't have to touch your beans and Quarkus will do its magic. There is a case if you are using a corner case or super specific feature that is not covered by the extension, then you need to be aware that the extension cannot be enough for you. But if you use the regular common cases, then it's perfectly fine. The same with the Spring Data JPA and the same with the Spring Security. So those extensions are covered and then you don't need to touch your code. So we've reached the important point where I see, well, which was the evolution. Okay, so with the Springboot, the application was taking 4.7 seconds to start, and it was consuming more than 600 megabytes of memory. With Quarkus on JVM, it was consuming taking half the time and less than half the memory. So we divided by 2. But if we go with Quarkus native, remember only adding -p native on the command line, we are moving from around 5 seconds to half a second, and 630 megabytes to 21 megabytes. So that's an incredible improvement, and then you can go to serverless and even reduce the invoice on, let's say, Amazon, or even increase the cluster density, adding more applications with the same hardware. Okay, so I'm going to give you some references that can help you if you want to do the same migration or just simply know more about this technology. Here you have the 2 different repositories on GitHub where you can find the code on the original application and the migrated to Quarkus application. Also on the right you have the website for Quarkus, the Twitter handle for Quarkus also, and the developer Red Hat link where you will find several tutorials that can help you to learn about Quarkus. And the mailing list of Quarkus where you can ask questions, and for sure the community or the team behind Quarkus will help you. Those tutorials that I mentioned before, if you go to developerredhat.com, you will find tutorials based on Katacoda that are interactive tutorials that are happening on the cloud in Amazon for free and without messing your local machine. And it's perfectly fine to learn Quarkus. In this case, you have several tutorials that can help you a lot. Also the cheat sheet where you will find all the features and the news about Quarkus, and it's important to know which are the new things that every version has inside. Also, if you want to start coding with Quarkus, here you have code.quarkus.io. You select the libraries and it will produce a zip file to start. And also, if you want to migrate your application, there's a tool called Red Hat MTA, free and open source, that you can use, download, in order to statically analyze applications and see which are the changes that you need to do in order to follow a migration path. There are several migration paths, and one of them is Springboot to Quarkus. It will analyze your application and it will give you some story points and incidents, and then you will also find which files are having an issue and even the code that you need to touch in order to move from Springboot to Quarkus. Even you have a plugin for Eclipse Che and also VS Code and IntelliJ. Here also I wanted to share several real use cases of big companies that already have migrated from Springboot to Quarkus. I would say the biggest one, Vodafone Greece, that migrated Springboot to Quarkus, even just going to JVM. I totally recommend that you follow those links and read about these real experiences. And that has been all. Thank you very much. Please reach me by Twitter, by email, on my blog, and ask me questions, or if you have any doubt or you need help in order to do your migration, I will be more than glad to help you. And if I cannot help you directly, I will try to reach someone that can give us the knowledge. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you and see you. Bye.